In this episode of the Exploring Information Security Podcast, what is React2Shell?
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security Podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I'm your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we'll be exploring React2Shell. With me to do that is Frank Catucci, Global Cybersecurity, AppSec, Product, and Engineering Leader. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. Feedback for the show, timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. Also, please rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We have a Discord we've started up, so go check that out. Also, a listserv. You can find both those at exploresec.com/community to see how to sign up for both of those. So this was a good one to cover. Actually, Frank, as you'll hear, we were going to talk about something else, which we might next year at some point. But React2Shell is kind of a big deal. It's very much on the Log4j kind of spectrum as far as vulnerabilities go, as well as some of the other fun ones, Heartbleed, Shell Shock, all those different ones. And we kind of dive into it a little bit more. If you are interested in an AppSec person, I believe Frank is still. I mean, we recorded this kind of mid-December, but I believe he is still looking for opportunities at this point right now. So if you want to do that, check him out on LinkedIn. I'll put those in the show notes, but it's Frank Catucci, really great AppSec guy. I've known him for many, many years. We went to DerbyCon together back in like 2015, which was my first DerbyCon. So I've known the guy for a while, especially, I worked in the state of South Carolina, actually interviewed with him at one point. Fun fact here, interviewed with him, did not get the job. It was for an actual network administrator. This is before, cybersecurity teams were really starting to spin up, but eventually did get to know him because it's a small town, and he still stayed in touch with some of the people I did end up working at the same company for. So little side rant there, but really great episode. Really excited for this to come out. I hope everyone has a happy new year in 2026. We are leaving 2025 for anybody listening after this that's diving into React2Shell and see what kind of stuff we had to deal with, several years from now. But with that, let's go exploring.
Sorry, I'll stop the small talk.
No, we can do the small talk before we actually start recording. No, it's good. Doing security awareness. So this was not on my radar until like this morning when I dug in. Like we've had I've seen it. I've seen people talk about it. We had someone else drop in going, this might look bad. In our Teams channel, and but I haven't dug into it until this morning, and now I'm like, holy crap, how are more people not talking about this?
Yeah, it's bad, dude.
Yeah, like just digging in, it's like, where would you rank this as far as like Log4j and like Heartbleed? I don't know if there's another one you'd want to put in that would be higher than either one of those two, but those are like the two that pop to mind.
Heartbleed for sure. Log4j. I don't even remember the struts vulnerability. That was pretty.
Yes, the Apache struts one. Yeah. That's how. Isn't that like how Experian got owned or something like that?
This one's rough, man. The thing we're seeing with this one though is the weaponization is off the chain. So like there's so much automation that's occurring for this exploit, where like Mirai botnet joins, command and controls, like, dude, fully fucking automated. Just, I mean, and you got connections going to sleep. You got stuff that are, pervasive, kind of coming back. Like you can't get rid of it. Like it's just the weaponization of this is just insane. And whether AI is helping that or not, but it's when you get something that's unauthenticated, where you could pretty much just launch any process you want, it's basically catastrophic. on the impact it can have. Now, I'll say because of where it's occurring, there has been a lot of WAF kind of very easy WAF rules and things to deploy. There was some drama at some point with WAF bypass and a researcher saying, you just said that you put in a WAF check for this, but I bypassed your WAF. And that came into a whole drama of things where there was a misunderstanding between the bypass rule and that specific vendor couldn't be bypassed with the payload that the researcher was using, but the other WAFs could. And so it's interesting though, because this is something where you can mitigate, but it's still the root cause of it's not even the root cause. It's okay, there are a million different root causes that can happen in CVSS 10s or RCE or things like that, but it comes down to that log4j scenario where do you have these versions, these affected components running? Where in your ridiculous ecosystem am I going to be able to find where this is running? And then how fast can I get these versions patched or updated? And what I think with this one is it's going to be similar. Like if you remember Log4j, there was iterative patches, right? So there was hey, we're going to release a patch Log4j version X. And then this component's upgraded. Okay, great. Now there's a new exploit. Okay, we have to upgrade again. So I think on Log4j, they went up, was it 3 or 4? Before they were, said and done.
5. Yeah, it's 5.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to go in the same direction. I say that too because of the affected versions of the software. It's not just React, right? So yes, it's React version 19. Let me double check my notes here. I think it's React 19. Yeah, React 19 and all the way 19.0 through 19.1. And that's great, right? With if you have the RSC feature enabled with those versions of React, but the thing is, the Next.js piece, the Next.js framework, it uses an app router that's a default, right? And that one is actually an easier kind of default configuration to take advantage of, and that one runs from version 15.0 to 16.03. So you're looking at all of React, you're looking at all of Next.js. There's also Remix, not as popular, but these are JavaScript frameworks that are doing a lot of server side, or client side rendering of data. And it's not where it's almost as if you're looking at the old web applications before SPAs, right? Before single page apps, where you had connections. Those connections would go to databases. You control the input, the validation, et cetera, from the databases. This is something where all of this stuff is being controlled with basically that singular path, that front end, that JavaScript framework that's doing a lot of that processing for you, and to find an exploitation that happens that can occur with a post request, essentially, without any type of validation. Now you're opening yourself up to just an extreme exposure as far as what's out there on the internet. And look, the proof of concepts and things that came out were fairly benign, but it only took a day before we saw weaponized kind of payloads. It's funny that we look at how fast this occurred. We're seeing things where there's multiple command and control servers. The exploit paths are doing things like Mirai botnets. They're doing things to obfuscate payloads so they can evade detection of your WAF rules. this stuff is like out there right now, and I mean, there's a bunch of honeypots that are seeing ridiculous amount of attacks. Now, those things are containerized mostly, so a lot of those are not like you're seeing as much as you're willing to expose. But the fact of the matter is that this stuff is just super pervasive across the internet, and the footprint of this and where you may use it in your business is just insane. And you know, it comes back to like, what is your AppSec program's like posture? Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you addressing a Log4j? What have you learned in the past, and how are you doing that today? And the fact of the matter is, like, if you remember when Log4j came out, there was, people were touting reachability, but in, 3 iterations later, they were like, oh, well, we can exploit this even if it's not being utilized by looking at the way that this call is being framed, and there's not specific rules around that. So it doesn't know that it's coming from a specific trusted component or something like that. So you're basically being able to run those arbitrary type of commands with, server level permissions that are doing functions in which they were designed to do. And you're doing that with essentially admin or root level access. So how do you find those? I think we come back to those same type of conversations, right? It comes down to things like SBOMs and software composition analysis, and the easier way of like, do you have a good ASPM or ASRM where you can go in and query and say, hey, look, show me everywhere where I have React version 19 to 1903 or whatever it is. Where do I have Next.js? Where do I have this? And then be able to have accurate information about where you have these technology deployed. Because the truth of the matter is that, yes, mitigations are great, but until you patch, until you upgrade these versions, you're not going to actually be protected. And that's what we're seeing here, is that the pervasiveness of React, and rightfully so, right? React had a lot of really good mitigations that came out, a lot of good built-in security functionality, being able to eliminate a lot of like cross-site scripting and things of that nature. So you have React deployed as a very popular JavaScript framework, and not even getting into the Next.js stuff, but this is stuff where you are probably using it somewhere, you're probably exposed, and you have hours to kind of fix or mitigate these, because the minute these POCs and these vulnerabilities become public, they're weaponized. We always say it's an arms race, but it's really coming down to being an arms race in a very much more critical exposure format, where if you don't do something to mitigate or patch, that you are essentially being open, and you're probably going to be exploited at some point. So, this is one of those things. We could get into exactly, how and why, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, is that you need to figure out where you have this running, and immediately put at least a layers of mitigation, but really understand that you're going to have to be fixing and updating these components. So it's been interesting to see in the last day or two, for sure.
All right. One side note before I ask the next question: your mic is rubbing against something. I don't know if it's your beard or your shirt or whatever. So you might have to like hold it up.
All right,
like
hold on.
I can hear like every little movement.
Yeah, it's probably my shirt. I'll hold it up. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. So what I wrote down here. Yes, I mean, there's a lot to dive in there. Like, one of my first thoughts when you mentioned the WAF and someone bypassing, it's like, is your WAF built on React.js? Because I saw that with Heartbleed, where the Heartbleed, it was a library within Linux that had it similar. I think Log4j is similar thing, right? And this is similar, right? It's all open source stuff.
It is.
So it's like, to your point, and it's popular, and but it's going to be everywhere, because it's not just to me, this is not just a development problem, right? This is, and you've already mentioned the Mariah stuff, which is an IoT based thing where they just seem to be scanning to exploit devices that have React in them that may or may not be patchable, right? Thinking, for a lot of companies, what does your camera systems have? Do they have React? So it's like, it's a bigger problem. Like, it's a big, massive vulnerability management problem where it can be, and like, is there proof of concept code, or is there an easy way to start testing against your network? Because ideally you have like pen testers or a SOC that can start running things or threat hunts against your environment to see is code, is this attack being run against it, or can you exploit the vulnerability via some benign script?
Yeah, so most of the let's say that most of the vendors out there, for the AppSec vendors, do have like signatures and tests. However, if you wanted to run your own, like your own proof of concept to do detection, there are benign proof of concepts out there. There are a number of there's really a number of proof of concepts out there that don't necessarily provide you any, let's say, no nefarious or malicious or damaging payloads, right? So
right.
there are payloads out there which just do very, very basic things, right? They'll run a who am I, or they'll cat an etc password or something like that, right? So there are a number of those out there. Available on GitHub. I have a couple in my GitHub repository that work that are benign, right? There's a number of these things that are easily weaponized that you can also find. But if you wanted to like try to do this in your own environment, there are a number of unauthenticated proof of concepts that are strictly for testing and not having any type of actual impact. And so those are readily available on GitHub. If you just honestly just look for the CVE name and POC and search GitHub, you'll find a few of them out there. But just make sure that you're looking at one that does not actually have malicious payload. It's just something. And again, right?
Yeah,
it's like it's running simple commands. It's like run this post and show who am I, right? The Linux command who am I, right? So it's like there are if you run that POC and it comes back as root and you like F, right? Like, I don't have root privileges, why am I come back as root? Like, that's a pretty good benign payload, right? Just to see if it's successful, or a test or a signature. But yeah, I mean, these components are everywhere. And like you mentioned, right? So like, is your WAF vulnerable, right? So like, is your front end vulnerable? Think about like Heartbleed, right? So this was like SSL TLS, right? So like, but what if you're doing that termination and you are doing that termination on load balancers, you're doing a termination on a web application firewall or a CDN or something in that nature, where you might be fixing this on the server side, but you're also having this where you're terminating SSL to be able to do that inspection at that level, and then having that be specifically vulnerable. So these are all real world scenarios. Now, most of these you could argue like, hey, you shouldn't, like, do you need this React GUI in front of your WAF? But let's look at the reality of these products, right? A lot of the products out there, security products, are running React front ends, right? So that is a very popular front end to run for, not just for your individual businesses or your business dependent web apps internally, but also for your security vendors, right? So the other thing is like, okay, so you mentioned a great point. It's like, yeah, we might have an ASPM, we might have something that shows me, or an SBOM that shows me where everything is in my environment. Okay, well, now that what about your vendors? What about the vendors that you're using that may have that reachability, that exploitability in that component, right? So now it's not only responsible for you, or you're not responsible for your environment, but now you also have to worry about if your vendor environments, whether that's a vulnerability management vendor, an AppSec vendor, a firewall vendor, whatever it is, has that exposure. You would hope that your security vendors are going to be pretty quick to jump on this. But again, when you have hours or a day, it's not something necessarily that's easily pushed out to production customers in hours before people are blanketing the internet with showdown scans and things of that nature to be able to find the stuff.
Yeah, and the WAF too, right? I mean, we talked about WAF as being mitigated. I would say if that's in place, you can put those that mitigating controls in place. But honestly, like if you don't have a WAF in, do not slam a WAF in over an application because you're going to break a lot more than just that vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a good time to be like, oh shit, let's I got a note that said my security solution could easily prevent this. Let's just slap a WAF in front of our like. You probably want to do that when nothing's going on to make sure that you're tuning and you're learning and you're understanding what your real baseline traffic looks like. You're not just relying on a emergency type of patch and you have never placed a WAF before and it's what you're doing there is you're probably shooting yourself in the leg to save a foot. It's like, we probably want to make sure that we have our best practices put in place for how a WAF should work before. But again, it's a good mitigating control if you do have that type of setup already in place.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the third party because I don't think people think about this, right? This is where your third party program really kicks in and goes out to all the vendors and go, okay, tell us if you have React. Are you susceptible to vulnerability? And if so, when are you putting out a patch so we can patch? Or a lot of it's now SaaS, right? So it's just they need to update their own platforms instead of you having to do it. But
you make a good point, right? A lot of it is SaaS, but I can tell you that a lot, like even though SaaS is preferred and probably most popular, you're still going to hit, like for security vendors, in my own experience, I don't speak for every vendor out there, but around 30 to almost even 40% of your clients, if you offer an on-prem version, they might be running an on-prem version. So like, when you're working with clients that are in very targetable industries, right? So let's talk about clients who don't want to expose things to the cloud, clients who are running, they don't want their vulnerability data uploaded to a SaaS. They want to run things on-prem. Now you have this other problem of, okay, so yes, it's a SaaS version. I push it out. All my customers are covered. Okay. Well, now how many of these different on-prem versions are you supporting? So if you also offer an on-prem, you're not going to say, okay, we only support one version of on-prem software, right? The reality is that you're going to have a rolling end of life schedule. So you're going to have multiple versions that you need to support. Are you going to be introducing breakage changes that may impact or break legacy services if you're supporting multiple different older versions? So that's not just true in-house. That's also true for the vendors, right? So, being security vendors, they also have the responsibility of saying, if these are supported versions, we have to be able to make sure we test and deploy these. Now, then comes I'm going to really throw a wrench in here, Tim. What about if you're in a extremely regulated industry where you have mandatory change control? So now, not only do
I would argue CISA came out and released on a Friday, like the Friday after this came to light. Like they went ahead and updated their Kev list, and I think the government does that too, and they're heavily regulated, and they're like, no, go patch this now.
I know, I get it, I get it, and that's the way it should run. But I also think there are still financial institutions, and I'll use that specifically. I know that there are still financial institutions out there where you would think that we're almost at 2026 where something like this comes out and you're instant to launch a patch, right? There's also industry where if you launch that patch and it breaks and you don't have availability, do you have responsibility to your stakeholders for for monetary type of compensation if there are no availability issues, like if there's SLAs for that. Like, let's say that you're running something that's wiring millions of dollars of money around the globe on a real-term basis, or point of sale, or something like that, right? Where, yes, you would think that you would be able to leverage a CVSS score of 10 with RCE and no authentication to be able to bypass a lot of those controls. But you're really still talking about humans in the loop at 3 a.m. or whatever have you to get this stuff out, that are doing break fix testing on these versions. You can rely on documentation all you want, but there's still an understanding that security is supporting the business. And, you're going to still have to have those conversations where, yes, we need to get this patched immediately. And it may be equally important to being available and having your monetary streams coming in. So, it's that age-old kind of battle between, do we fix a vulnerability or do we stay up and open for business? Ideally, you always want to do both. But, there are clients out there that I think are still struggling with, what do you mean I have to upgrade these programs like within the next 12 hours or I can be publicly exploited, right? And so, this is just reiterating a lot of the kind of things that you and I have been talking about and advocating for, and just that awareness of when something like this occurs, you can't just tell GPT go fix it. Like, it's just not that easy, right? So these are things that are impactful, and when they do occur, you need to have plans ahead of time. Now, a lot of folks learn the hard way with Log4j. Did they learn their lesson based on what I'm seeing? Not really.
No. No. You mean S-bombs didn't take off? We've been talking about S-bombs at this point for...
Yeah, I'm going to throw a new wrench into this, Tim. I've been working with a company doing some research. What about AI bombs? Right? Now, what if you have an exposure and maybe it's not React. Okay, maybe you have another exposure and it's part of your AI workflow. Are you going to be able to patch that? Are you going to be able to? You're going to be relying again on a provider, a vendor, or a third-party open source to provide that fix. And it's S-bombs, any build of materials, but it's beyond that, right? You're not going to have an S-bomb. Well, you should have an S-bomb for your vendors, but are you looking at the S-bomb for your COTS software? Are you looking at the S-bombs for your binaries? I don't know, right? There's some companies out there doing some cool shit, right? So like Manifest Cyber, Reversing Labs, like there are a lot of cool companies that are doing that kind of reversing and binary control and looking at the components of COTS and embedded medical devices and like auto software in cars, and like it goes so much beyond just patch your web servers. And so those are the conversations that are continuing to happen. And I just think that no matter how far we kind of keep getting ahead of the curve as far as security and secure coding and not making sure we address the OWASP top 10, and you still have that huge glaring supply chain piece in your face all the time. And this is a perfect example of why I think there needs to be more attention and investment on that supply chain side of the world. And this just highlights parts of that. And I guess just brings a little bit different lights to how that problem could be addressed or occur.
I mean, it's a tough problem too, because it's not just React's right there. It could be buried 3 to 4 levels deep in packages and other stuff. And it's especially in the open source community, because we saw this with Log4j, right? Where it could be 3-4 levels down, and you're like the one open source project is waiting for the other one, waiting for the other one to actually patch it. And that one's not even, being contributed to anymore. And so people have to go actually like commit and, get the patch actually published. So I mean, it's a tough, and that's just like trying to get it fixed. But someone trying to identify, because you can have an S-bomb, but it might not be complete because how far deep into the thing do you go?
Oh, 100%. You can't just rely on a vendor. You have to be able to do that diligence yourself, and you need the tools and the expertise to do so. And it's a problem, and it's a layered problem. It's an embedded problem. It's a problem that it could be, like you said, 3 or 4 layers deep, where it's not instantly right in front of your face, where I can just do a grep in a giant file for find this, right? It's not. It's far beyond that. And so these are the type of things that occur. And I think what I'm also seeing now is, usually there's always like this. There's been historically a push from the exploit perspective, right? I'm gonna kind of step back and look at this from a threat actor perspective, right? There's always kind of been, we have targets, let's hit the low hanging fruit, let's get the data, let's breach the data, etc. That's great, but I think we're starting to see, and it's not new, but we're starting to see it be more pervasive, is the multi-use functionality, right? And I mentioned the botnets. Like, if I can go out there and build a botnet that is going to be available for the next, like, let's say safely, 90% of the botnet I build today will be online for the next 4 days, 5 days, whatever. What can I do with those services, right? We're looking at ransomware. We're looking at cryptojacking. We're looking at, all of these type of different attacks that are just using your compute systems as that jump off point, or that exploit point, or that resource that you're not paying for, or that you don't have access to, or you don't have liability for,
Well, and to the botnet point, right? Like, that is something that I think it was big news probably 7-8 years ago. And it's not in the news cycle as much, but if you read the Verizon DBIR report, denial of service attacks are still like one of the top attacks out there. And if you read Brian Krebs, they're getting bigger and bigger and more powerful.
Oh,
and this is just one that kind of proliferates that, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, like, before, you used to see like you saw a gigabyte DOS, and you're like, oh, Cloudflare can do that, and we got these other mitigations in place, and blah blah. Okay, look, I think we're up to 23 terabytes.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So
terabytes.
We're talking about terabytes, but let's back that up. Let's look at the time interval. That is 23 terabytes a second. Okay, 23 terabytes a second. That what's that? Oh, I think it's what Cloudflare. I'm looking at it right now. It's 20. Okay, right now we're at 23 terabytes per second, over 10.6 billion packets per second. Look, if I'm utilizing these type of vulnerabilities, where I'm not really interested even in, let's say, like, pick a major restaurant chain or something, right? So, like, I'm not interested in your customer data, or I'm not like, yes, I'm interested in it, but look, I'm going to use this for something different. Now I can use something like this to do unprecedented DDoS, right? So, like, what happens when I turn that 23 terabyte a second? What happens when I turn that into 50? Or what if, Tim, I was able to get petabytes per second now?
Yeah. Oh, it's coming.
Right?
Hundreds next, and then we're gonna, then it'll be petabytes,
right.
or right in the, yeah.
But is there even infrastructure out there that can handle that? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know, right? Yeah, like Brian Krebs got kicked off of, I think he's on like Google Defender or something, but like he got kicked off one of them that was like, they were one of the big ones too that would defend against DDoS cats, and they're like, we can't even handle this. Get off! You're taking our other clients down at this point. Well, so yeah.
But what if? And that's the thing. What if Cloudflare or Google says, you know what? Look, we've implemented something great. We're going to go out. We're going to say, we have the ability, the highest ability on the internet. We can take 100 terabit per second attack. Let's just say that they can. Okay. Well, let's say that they have 100 clients, like, that are or even 10 clients that are getting attacked at the same time. The fact of the matter is, something's breaking, right? You're not just because you can handle that level, you're it's exponential, right? You're trying to handle that level of traffic at an exponential level with multiple clients. And I think that's what Brian saw, what Krebs saw is like, yeah, they're handling it, but the rest of their clients are left holding the bag, and that's not good for business, right?
No. Well, and it's not just people doing the botnets either. I think, I did a Gemini deep research to try and get caught up on this, on top of like reading articles on the internet that I could find. And even I listened to some podcasts, and it's the Chinese were called out as like state actors that were kind of going after this. And this is their MO too, right? They don't know what they're going to do with the access. They just know they have it. They're just going to try to get as much as possible. And then at some point down the road, either it'll be gone or they use it to, get into an organization that they might actually have an interest in getting into, because it's just kind of sitting there waiting for them to figure out what they want to do with it.
Yeah. And it's weaponized nation state. So like, let's say that there's a time where they want to strike, right? They're going to, that nation state's going to sit on it, right? They're going to have pervasive connections. They're going to have shells. They're going to be so embedded that, let's say that they can embed themselves to where you patch, but it doesn't matter because they've already implemented 3 or 4 levels deep where there's backdoors that are being obfuscated payload backdoors or something, kind of connections that mask the traffic or whatever it is, right? So let's say that you have a nation state that attacks this, that creates a botnet or a repository of whatever it is of compromised hosts, etc. Like they don't necessarily, like, even if you patch, like, is it too late, right? Do you know, like, so there's going to be TTPs and IOCs that you need to be able to look for now in your SOC and in your SIM. You're going to have to understand this. And when these people decide to attack, they're, like you said, yes, a portion of those could be gone, and that's great, hopefully. But the fact of the matter is that I can still look at sources like Shodan and find, 20 teens publicly accessible CVEs that are out there, right? It's like, you can still have a vast amount of resources for that attack piece that gets built in. And those kind of more advanced attackers, yeah, they're not going to be the noisy ones. They're not going to be the ones that are, setting off your bells and whistles on all of your WAFs and things like that. They're going to be the ones that come in, they get access, they set up pervasive access, they compromise. You might not even know they're in the system because they're not doing anything yet. And if you don't have the right amount of, I would say, visibility into all of your data, and you have all of your log sources going into some, like, if you're not using an advanced like Google SecOps or like an advanced, Splunk implementation or something like that, you may not know that you had an IOC before it was even in the system listed as an IOC, right? So, you have this kind of footprint that just grows, and you can use that for anything. And that's what, the dangerous pieces of this is like, yeah, the majority of, tech companies and more forward advanced security folks, they're going to be like, oh, we patched, we made sure, this and that. But how does that affect every other business that's not bleeding edge on the security front right now? And I think that's where we get dangerous. And you can look at like those DDoS attacks, like they're not coming from, the Microsoft and Googles of the world. They're coming from a wide variety of compromised hosts being orchestrated in a unified manner to just, everyone's internet connections are so fast now, right? You have fiber everywhere, that it's just astronomical, the amount of traffic that you can, generate, not just for DDoS, but for any other type of attacks, or even for decoys for other type of attacks.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the it's not over if you just patch, because one of the things I read, and I was going to ask you about this, is is rotating your secrets, right? API keys, credentials, anything token within the application. I would like what I
Yeah.
read was assume breach essentially if you have a React.js externally facing, of course, right? And because we should differentiate too. It's like if you have internal systems, those can be prioritized a little bit lower than if you have externally available systems that have React.js in them.
Oh,
Then you might have a
100%. But that comes to those mitigating controls too, because internally you probably have. Do you have an XDR, MDR, EDR, whatever the hell you have? Like, do you have certain amounts of protection? No one's in your internal network without some level of authentication, hopefully multi-factor. Like, there's a lot. Yes, you could send a phishing email and exploit an internal only payload on an internal only server and gain the similar access. But look, at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to hit the ones that are internet facing with no authentication needed. Yeah, you're not going to have those layers there. And again, like you mentioned, right? It's not just a patch and forget, right? It's once you like, let's say that you found that this is running in your system, you could essentially anything that React server has access to, being like all of the APIs, like you mentioned, you're going to have to rotate your keys, rotate your secrets. You're going to have to actually do resets if you notice that you're going to have to reissue the auth and auth Z layer if you see those type of things in your environment. And then even if you don't see them, it's probably a best practice after something like this as well. So it does go layers deep and multi-layers deep, and not just let's fix or upgrade my React server. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I mean, in my experience with Log4j, because I was at a company, we were kind of on top of it, right? We had our external stuff taken care of pretty quickly, but then it took, because we had internal stuff that was affected by it. It took several months for us to do it, because again, like we've already discussed, it's like it's not just apply the patch. It's if you apply the patch, you could potentially break something else that might need to go get fixed, or they might have a planned upgrade, and so you kind of have to align with the business around that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so many layers deep when you get into something like this. That you mentioned that timeline. You said that you were on top of it, right? I was on top of Log4j when it happened, but I can tell you right now that even though we were AppSec on top of it, like legit team, to get everything buttoned up was not a one-day thing. It was a multi-day to week type of operation, and those were with people that knew what they were doing. And so, is that too long? And I'll be, honestly, it is too long. It's too long if you're, if you look at how quickly if you look at how quickly these attacks are proliferating and how quickly they're weaponized. The other big thing with this is that if you get this exploit to fire, you have all of the access Node.js has, which means all of the APIs. You have access to all of Node's APIs, all of them. And so what do those APIs do? What do those APIs have access to? What can those APIs do? What can could I potentially even create a new one, right? So like there's just so many layers deep that you have to be aware of, that even if you know what you're doing, this is not I just had 3 servers and I just upgraded the 3 components, we're good. Chances are, that's not the case, and that this is just going to be, again, if it takes a company that knows what they're doing, 3 to 7 days, give or take, to get this stuff buttoned up, when those malicious payloads are out there in 6 to 12 hours, that arms race just becomes that much more difficult on the defending side of the house, and again, makes the case for having those proper tools and implementation for visibility and for mitigation across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. How long is this vulnerability going to be around?
It's tough to say. are there still log4j servers out there? Apparently there are. So I would say that it'll be around for quite a while. How hot it is, would be varied. It depends. Now, again, it depends on the patches as well. Like, are we going to have 4 different versions of patches? Because right now I haven't really seen a whole lot, right? We know that there are patches out there, but are there going to be other discoveries or bypasses that take advantage of that really get at the guts and take advantage of the React server components, the RSC flight protocol, the RPCs that are enabled in order for this to happen, right? The deserialization or unserialized data, right? So like these are things that keep popping up, right? These are not like you look at like Java or .NET deserializations like just separately, right? Not in this in particular, but these things don't just go away, right? They evolve, and as they do, I would say it's going to be hot for probably a month or two. Now, how long will it last? That's a great question. I think we'll see a similar impact. Maybe not as widespread, but a similar impact for longevity, I would say, to around that log4j type of compromise. But we'll have to wait and see just how many iterative patches and things that occur.
Yeah, I don't know if you read this article. It's from F5 Labs where they said shell shock makes a comeback because someone's actually trying to exploit that stuff, and I was like, "Holy crap, that's a blast!" It's like 2014, right? Like that's over 10 years old, and it's still around.
What's funny is, like I mentioned with like deserialization type of vulnerabilities and things, like, but they're like once you have, like, let's just not even talk about React for a second. Let's say that I just give you an RCE with no authentication from the internet that you have root on. Now, I don't even care what the component is. What can you do with that? Can you use that for a multitude of different type of attacks, having root access on these devices? You're gonna find stuff that maybe was addressed in the past. Maybe people are going to say, hey, this is a new way for me to take advantage of another flaw that I never had access to. I never had access to be able to write an exploit that worked because I needed root access, and that's not, you can't get that just arbitrarily from the internet. Well, what if I gave that to you? Now I'm building targeted payloads for certain systems. We have, it's just a huge impact. It's not just that one vulnerability. It is leveraging or chaining different things together once you get that level of compromise that you can't look past. And this is just an example of that entry point for that purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should clarify, it's like scanning, like they're saying people just scan for it. So actual exploitation, you'd hope not, but I'm sure there's, what was that one that Mubix always had? It was, and I did a podcast on, I should know this. It's like MS 087.
Yeah. I mean, it's the 067, I think it was.
Yeah.
When old is new. And like what's funny is like every few years, myself and some other, like I'll find it out there, right? It's like hacking. What is it? Hacking like it's 2005 because it still works, or something like that, right? So you got 1995, 2005, 2015, like this shit comes back, man. And so like these techniques, that once you have something this detrimental and open to you, it just opens the book for how creative can I be to take advantage of anything else that could be possibly or potentially exploited in your network. Now that I have root access to the essentially the web server that has access to your data and your APIs. You can pretty much do anything you want. So, if it still works, man, what's old is new. We're going to see things like that occur.
Yeah.
But I won't be all negative though. So from a positive standpoint, what we've also seen from Log4j is the vendor abilities to detect these have been getting better. Okay, so like the amount of time that it takes your scanning vendor to launch a new signature. I remember being up on the Struts thing years ago on a Saturday at midnight, working with one of the largest banks in the world, and we were literally writing the detections based on things that we were seeing happen real time. And it was like we were doing this as a team, and it was very not normal for a scanning team to be looking at real time exploitation traffic and writing these things instead of looking for proof of concept code or dissecting the differentials of a patch or different things like that. So we are seeing the positive side of the world where I think the security companies, scanning companies, even internal security programs and departments are understanding that there is an increased type of awareness and action plan that has to occur in rapid format. So yeah, we're seeing less and less of those change control and don't break my stuff and that kind of thing. So the vendors are getting better. The internal IT teams are getting better. I do think that that's a plus. And also, there is legislation out there that has helped that, right? So legislation in SBOMs, legislation for AI bombs that's actually in draft right now, legislation that occurs that says you can't ship vulnerable software with third-party components that have any higher or criticals. Like all of these things work together to push things in the right direction. It just feels like sometimes we're moving in the right direction, but it's still a little bit slower than it needs to be when you're looking at like the malicious standpoint. But I'm going to take some positives in that the signatures are being written, the proof of concepts are coming out. CISOs, other folks are always going to like, don't push proof of concept code out to GitHub within hours of patch because that's going to kill us. Security by obscurity does not ever mean that you're safer. Like the minute that patch is released, there's thousands of people are going to be creating a proof of concept instantly based on what that patch did or what that what that iteration of code did, what that pull request changed. So we're getting better, we're getting faster, but I think as things get as environments continue in complexity, that's where some of those things need to be looked at, right? It's not just patching, it's the complexity of the entire the gravity of the whole situation and all of the different things that those components have access to or can touch, even from the third party, as we mentioned earlier, probably is just why these things are still making such an impact even as we get better.
Yeah. What would you like to plug?
What would I like to plug, Tim? So I would plug again those the supply chain vendors, some cool kind of tech out there. Been talking and working with some of those guys again from the Manifest cyber side, Reversing Labs, any of the folks that are looking at going out there and doing more with supply chain security. I really think that that's going to be an area of concentration, and don't limit yourself to just software. You also have to look at everything else that you're running and those type of things. The other piece that I would say is like, I think a lot of people took advantage of taking for granted the ability to say, I have an SBOM, this is where my vulnerabilities are, but really having a good holistic type of like ASPM or ASRM solution where you can state for a fact, like, all of the software that I have is inventoried. I know where every version is deployed. Now, again, there's complexities, but having the ability to have that queryable at your fingertips in real time is going to be extremely important as well. And continue doing your threat intelligence and your pen testing and things of that nature, because that's where a lot of this stuff, the proof is also put into the pudding, if you will, to make sure that these things that you're doing are capable and that you don't have those blind spots. Other than that, I plug myself. Looking to start something fresh and new here, starting in the new year. So hit me up on LinkedIn. Let's chat. Let's dive into AppSec or cloud and API and those type of fun things. I love research, love talking security, man. Always here. And so we're going to be doing some exciting stuff coming this new year, some new opportunities. So reach out to me if you want to learn more, and we'll have a chat.
Cool, and we'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. Yeah, we were supposed to talk about the Shai Hulud worm that's hitting NPM, which is also another big thing that deals with a lot of what we talked about. But and we were like initially like, maybe we can get to both of them. But as I was digging into React, I was like, no, this is going to be one episode. We'll schedule something for another time to discuss that one.
Yeah. Also, if for folks that are listening out there and they want to dive into the NPM supply chain issues, Paul McCarty has some excellent material out there, otherwise known as 6 Mile, I believe is his handle sometimes. But yeah, dive into those. I'd be happy to dive into that as well. But I think when I sent you the note on this, it was like, this is blowing up in front of my face in real time. So let's talk about it. Like, not that the other stuff's not important, right? It's still extremely valid, but this is like happening today. It's happening right now as we're talking. So time based is critical, and I hope this helps some folks.
Yeah, critical 10 doesn't come around a lot, but when it does, it gets a name, and everybody uses the name. So
yeah, hey, you have some design capabilities, man. Maybe you could look into freelancing new CVSS 10 logos.
Oh yeah, well, I just used AI at this point, man. I use Gemini for all that stuff.
Fair enough.
Yeah, which we didn't even get to with this about how AI is impacting all this, but that's fine.
I'd love to do a separate one on AI if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Cool. Well, thank you for joining me to discuss React. Thank you. Hold on, write that. Thank you for joining me to discuss React2Shell. God, say that 5 times fast, man. You can't say that.
Well, thank you for having me, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.